He was already seated when they approached him. Calm, composed, and quietly adjusting the seatbelt, the old man didn't say a word when the flight attendant leaned down and whispered with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sir, this is first class." He simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 2A. She hesitated, her smile twitching into something less polite. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" He reached into the inside pocket of his weathered coat and handed it over. Her eyes scanned it quickly. Seat 2A. It was correct. Still, she held it for a second too long, eyes narrowing just slightly. "I'll be right back." She walked off without another word. Walter Bennett looked around the cabin. The other passengers had that faint, practiced look of pretending not to stare while absolutely listening in. One or two even leaned slightly into the aisle, catching a better glimpse of the man who didn't quite look the part. His shoes were scuffed. His shirt collar was worn soft from age. His hands rested gently on his lap, fingers folded, calloused from years of hard work. But he didn't fidget. He wasn't ashamed. There was a quiet grace in how he sat, like a man used to waiting. The flight attendant returned. This time the cabin manager came with her. "Sir," the man began, soft but firm, "we just need to double-check a few details. Could you please come with us?" Walter raised an eyebrow. "Is something wrong?" "It'll just take a minute, sir." He unbuckled his seatbelt without another word and stood up slowly, steady on his feet. A woman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in her seat. No one said anything. The walk from 2A to the galley was short, but the silence made it feel longer. Behind the curtain, Bradley Moore held up the boarding pass again, scanning the code on his tablet. "You booked this ticket yourself?" Walter gave a small nod. "Yes." "Online?" My son handled the booking. He said it was all set." Bradley gave a short sigh. "Sir, we're trying to confirm payment, but we're not finding a record under your name." "Walter Bennett." "Yes, I know." Bradley tapped a few more times on the screen, then turned to Carla. "Have him wait here for a minute." She turned to Walter with that same flat smile. "Would you mind stepping aside, sir? We'll clear this up." Walter gave a small nod and stepped quietly to the side. The minutes ticked by. Passengers kept boarding. Luggage wheels hummed through the aisles, and Walter stood silently beside the curtain, arms at his sides, looking at nothing in particular. Then the verdict came. "I'm sorry, sir," Bradley said, not sounding sorry at all. "There appears to have been a booking error. We'll go ahead and get you seated in economy." "I paid for first class," Walter said simply. "We understand. But this is a full flight, and we've confirmed that the system doesn't reflect that payment. If you'd like to take it up with customer service after landing, we can file a report. But right now, we need to proceed with takeoff." No raised voice. No anger. Just that same quiet reply. "Very well." As he walked through the cabin, boarding pass still in hand, no one met his eyes, until he reached row 28. A young boy looked up at him from the middle seat and smiled. "You can take the window," the boy said brightly. Walter nodded, managed a small smile, and took the offered seat. He looked out the window, hands folded again. He said nothing, but someone somewhere in that cabin had recorded everything. A 15-second clip. No yelling, no screaming. Just an old man politely being escorted out of first class. By the time they reached cruising altitude, that clip had already been posted, and by the time Walter closed his eyes to rest, a man in a glass building thousands of miles away was about to see it. His name was Dorian Bennett, and this wasn't going to end the way the airline thought it would. Dorian Bennett's phone buzzed softly in his hand as he stared out the window of his private office, a rare moment of stillness in his otherwise chaotic day. He ran a successful tech empire, his influence spreading through industries like a quiet storm. But today, he wasn't thinking about profits or quarterly reports. He was thinking about his father. It had been months since Walter had made the decision to live quietly, far away from the public eye. The old man didn't want the luxuries Dorian could offer, the fancy cars, the sprawling houses. He preferred his quiet mornings and his modest routine, always putting family first. Dorian respected that. But now, the phone call had arrived with a video attached, and it hit him like a slap in the face. He clicked the notification and watched. It was the exact moment when his father was moved from first class to economy. The discomfort was evident in Walter's slow, deliberate movements, his calm demeanor still unwavering. But the scene wasn't the one that hurt Dorian the most. It was the look on the faces of the other passengers. Those whispers, the snickers, the way the flight attendants treated him like he didn't belong. The video ended. Dorian sat in silence for a long moment, his grip tightening on the phone. He didn't recognize that version of the airline he owned. This wasn't the brand he had worked tirelessly to build. This wasn't the company that promised respect for every passenger, no matter who they were. The phone buzzed again. His assistant's name flashed on the screen. "Dorian," she said on the other end, her voice calm but urgent. "I just got the alert. It's already gone viral." "I know," he said, cutting her off. "I've seen it. We need to address it before it gets any worse. People are angry. The press is picking it up. It's a nightmare." Dorian stood up, pacing across the room. He rubbed his hand across his jaw, trying to steady his thoughts. The anger was simmering just below the surface, but he couldn't afford to lose control. "I'll handle it," he said firmly. "I'm going to take the next flight out. I'll deal with this myself." "Sir, that's not—" "I'll be fine," he interrupted. "Just make the arrangements." His assistant hesitated, but didn't argue further. She knew when to back off. Dorian grabbed his coat, throwing it on over his sharp suit, and headed straight for the airport. He wasn't going to let this slide, not with his father involved. This wasn't just about reputation, it was about integrity. And no matter how many millions he had in the bank, he couldn't stand to see his father treated like that. Not by anyone. Least of all by the people he trusted to represent his airline. Meanwhile, Walter sat in the cramped seat of economy, staring out the tiny window. The young boy who had offered him the window seat had long since fallen asleep, his head resting against the window. Walter hadn't slept a wink. His thoughts kept returning to Ava, his wife, his partner of nearly 40 years. She was in the hospital, and he had to get to her. But what had just happened? The discomfort was still lingering, an ache in his chest that wouldn't go away. It wasn't the seat, of course. It wasn't the luxury he was denied. He didn't care for any of that. He had lived a simple life, working with his hands, raising his children with dignity and respect. No, it wasn't the seat. It was the way he had been treated, the way they had looked at him, like he didn't belong, as if he was less than them. He sighed quietly and tried to close his eyes, but the discomfort of the situation wouldn't let him relax. The intercom buzzed, and a flight attendant's voice crackled over the speakers. "We are cruising at 35,000 feet. Thank you for flying with us today. If you need any assistance, please let us know." The words felt distant, almost mocking, as if they were aimed at someone far removed from the reality he had just experienced. But then Walter's phone buzzed. He glanced down at it. A text from Dorian. "Are you okay, Dad?" The simple question hit him harder than he expected. Walter wasn't the type to show weakness or ask for help, but the thought of his son, who was out there fighting battles for him without even knowing it, brought a lump to his throat. "I'm fine, Dorian," he typed back with a steady hand. "I'm on my way to see Ava. That's all that matters." He hit send, but even as he did, his fingers hovered for a moment over the screen. The unease in his chest wouldn't go away. Hours later, Dorian was already in the air. He had opted for a commercial flight, low profile just like he always preferred. He didn't want anyone to know who he was, at least not yet. He needed to see things for himself. As the plane cruised toward its destination, he sat silently, watching the other passengers, noticing the little things. The way they smiled, how they glanced at their phones, the way they interacted with the flight attendants. No one here seemed to care about status or power. They were just people, existing in this small space, bound together by the same rules, the same journey. He felt a sharp pang of frustration. If only that was how the airline had treated his father. If only they had seen him as just another person. The flight attendant passed by, noticing Dorian's quiet demeanor. She gave him a courteous nod, but nothing more. She hadn't recognized him. None of them did. For now, he was just another passenger. But that was about to change. By the time Dorian's flight landed, he knew what he had to do. This was no longer about an old man being pushed aside. This was about sending a message, not only to the airline but to every single person who thought they could judge others based on appearances. Dorian was done being silent. He was going to make sure that everyone knew exactly who his father was, and this time, no one would be laughing. The moment Dorian stepped off the plane, he was already making calls. There wasn't a second to waste. He knew that the storm of outrage was only going to intensify the longer it went unaddressed. But this wasn't just about damage control. This was personal. Very personal. As he made his way through the airport terminal, he pulled out his phone and sent a message to his assistant. "Cancel the board meeting for tomorrow. I need you to book a press conference, an immediate one." Seconds later, she responded with a confirmation. The wheels were already turning. Now it was time for the rest of the world to understand what had just transpired and who was behind it. Dorian made his way to the airport lounge, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. He had always kept his family's history, his father's legacy, as private as possible. Walter Bennett had spent his entire life out of the spotlight. Even after Dorian's rise to fame and fortune, Walter stayed out of it all. He refused to attend charity events, declined interviews, and insisted on staying in the background. The only thing that mattered to Walter was the well-being of his family. And now, that quiet man had been humiliated in front of the world. He sat down at a table, rubbed his temples, and took a long breath. His phone buzzed again. A new message from his father. "Dorian, don't worry about me. Just focus on what's important. I'm fine." Dorian's hand tightened around his phone. "What's important?" he whispered to himself. "The airline? The money? The fame? It was Walter. His father was the only thing that mattered now." Walter had finally reached his destination, the hospital where his wife, Ava, was waiting. She had been ill for some time, and Walter hadn't been able to focus on anything else. But now, as he sat beside her hospital bed, the sting of what had happened on the plane remained fresh in his mind. Ava, weak but always strong, looked up at him with a tired smile. "You made it, Walter." "I made it," he replied softly, taking her hand. How was your flight? Walter hesitated, but only for a moment. He didn't want to worry her, didn't want her to know the truth about what had happened, but he couldn't hide it from her forever. It wasn't great, he said quietly, his voice betraying the discomfort he felt. They moved me out of first class. Ava's brow furrowed in confusion. What? Why? Walter exhaled a long, slow breath. It doesn't matter, Ava. What matters is I'm here. We're together. But Ava wasn't convinced. She knew him too well. Walter, she said softly, squeezing his hand. What happened? He shook his head, unwilling to dive deeper into the details. It's just a misunderstanding. I don't want to talk about it. Ava studied him for a moment, her eyes sharp despite her exhaustion. You've been through so much already. I just want you to be happy. Don't let anyone take that from you. Walter nodded, but inside something was burning. It wasn't just the indignity of being treated like he was invisible. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was the feeling that, no matter how much he had worked, no matter how hard he had tried to give his family a better life, he was still being overlooked, still being dismissed. Back at the airport, Dorian was about to make his final call. He entered the private lounge, his phone already buzzing with the latest developments. The media had caught wind of his presence. Soon, they'd be waiting at the press conference. He would need to do this right. But just as he was about to make the call, his phone rang. The number on the screen made his heart skip. It was Walter. Dad? Dorian answered quickly. Dorian, listen to me. His father's voice came through, hoarse and tired. I need you to forget about this. I'm fine. I don't want you to do anything. This isn't your fight. Dorian shook his head. Dad, I don't care what you want. You've already been through enough. I'm taking care of this. I don't want any trouble, Walter said, his voice steady but firm. I didn't raise you to fight battles that aren't yours. Dorian closed his eyes. He could feel his father's calm resolve, even from miles away. Dad, this is not about the money or the seat. It's about respect. I won't stand by and let you be treated this way. Don't make a spectacle of it, Walter replied. People don't need to know who I am. I don't want to be in the spotlight. I know you don't, Dorian said softly. But this isn't about you anymore. It's about showing the world that no one gets to treat people like that. Especially not you. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Walter sighed. I've spent my life out of the spotlight for a reason, Dorian. I don't need the world's attention. I don't care if you need it or not. The world will know your name. And when they do, they'll understand that the Bennett legacy isn't just built on money. It's built on dignity. And I won't let them forget that. Dorian ended the call and sat in silence for a long moment. He could feel the weight of his father's wishes, the burden of his refusal to make a fuss. But that wasn't who Dorian was. Not anymore. He stood up, took a breath, and walked toward the press area. He was ready. Ready to tell the world the story of Walter Bennett. Ready to show them that appearances were nothing more than a fleeting illusion. The press conference room was packed with reporters. The buzz of conversation died down as Dorian walked to the podium, his expression calm but purposeful. The moment he stepped into the spotlight, the room fell silent. They all knew who he was, the CEO of Bennett Airlines, one of the wealthiest men in the world. But today, it wasn't about the numbers. It wasn't about profits. It was about a man who had been wronged. Dorian cleared his throat, and the first question came. Mr. Bennett, What can you tell us about the viral video? Why was your father removed from first class? Dorian looked directly at the reporter, his voice steady but heavy with resolve. My father, Walter Bennett, has worked hard his entire life. He built this airline from the ground up, ensuring that it was known for its respect for every passenger. Recently, something happened that goes against everything we stand for. My father, who should have been treated with dignity and respect, was humiliated on a flight. The room grew quiet as Dorian continued. I will not stand by and let this kind of behavior go unchecked. The airline that bears our family name needs to be held accountable for their actions. We will make sure this never happens again. Dorian paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before adding, and as for my father, the world will soon know exactly who he is. The reporters exchanged glances, the realization dawning on them. Dorian wasn't just the CEO of Bennett Airlines. He was the son of Walter Bennett, the man who built the company from nothing, the man who had been humiliated in front of the world. And now, they would all know who Walter really was. The media frenzy had already begun. News outlets from around the globe were buzzing with the revelation that Dorian Bennett's father, Walter Bennett, was the founder of Bennett Airlines. It didn't take long for the story to snowball, and soon Walter's name was trending worldwide. Dorian had made sure of that. But this wasn't just about fame. This was about the truth. As Dorian sat in his office, the weight of the last few hours settled heavily on his shoulders. He had expected the backlash. What he hadn't prepared for was the overwhelming support from the public. Messages poured in from people who had witnessed the incident on the plane. They were angry, but they were also heartbroken for Walter. The story wasn't just about a man being kicked out of first class. It was about how society could be so quick to dismiss someone simply based on their appearance or their age. Dorian's assistant, Claire, knocked on the door before entering. She handed him a folder, her face etched with concern. These are the latest developments, Mr. Bennett. Dorian took the folder and flipped through it. One article caught his eye. The unknown legacy of Walter Bennett, from humble beginnings to global empire. The piece detailed his father's rise to success, how Walter had started with nothing, working day and night in various odd jobs before he'd founded the airline. The piece went on to highlight Walter's contributions to the community, his quiet generosity, and his refusal to ever seek the spotlight. It was a well-written tribute to a man who had spent his life avoiding attention. But it wasn't just the media that was reacting. The board members at Bennett Airlines had already reached out to Dorian with their concerns. They were worried about the negative impact this scandal would have on the company's reputation. They wanted him to tone things down, to move forward without making waves. But Dorian knew better. This wasn't just about the company. This was about a larger issue, one that reached far beyond the walls of the boardroom. We need to address this head-on, Dorian said to Claire, setting the folder down. No more apologies. No more excuses. Meanwhile, Walter sat in his wife's hospital room, watching the news coverage unfold. He had asked Dorian to keep things quiet, but he couldn't deny the pride that surged within him as he saw the outpouring of support from the public. Still, there was a gnawing discomfort. He had never wanted to be a symbol of anything. He had never craved attention. But now, it seemed unavoidable. Ava, ever the pragmatist, watched her husband carefully. She could tell he was struggling with the newfound attention. You're not doing this for the praise, Walter, she said gently, her voice soothing. You're doing this because you have a voice. And for once, the world is listening. Walter glanced at her, a mix of gratitude and unease in his eyes. I never wanted them to listen, You don't have to want it. It's happening. And you can use it for good, Walter. You've worked your whole life to build something. Don't let this moment pass without showing the world what you're truly made of. Walter's eyes softened as he took Ava's hand. I just wanted a quiet life with you, Ava. But now, I'll have to figure out how to handle this, how to make it count. Ava smiled warmly. We'll figure it out together, as always. Back in the boardroom, Dorian was facing the executive team, all eyes on him as he prepared to make his stance clear. The pressure to smooth things over with the media was mounting, but Dorian had already made his decision. He wasn't backing down. I know many of you want to handle this quietly, he began, addressing the group of senior executives. You want to apologize and move on, pretend like nothing happened. But let me be clear. We are not doing that. This company was built on principles that my father instilled. It's about respect, integrity, and family. We don't turn a blind eye when one of our own is treated unfairly. The room was silent, some members uneasy, others nodding in agreement. Dorian continued, his voice resolute. This isn't just about the seat on the plane. This is about how the world sees us and how we see ourselves. We need to lead by example. I will not allow my father to be erased from the story, not after everything he's done. A few members exchanged glances, then the CEO of the company, Gerard Wells, spoke up. Dorian, I understand your sentiment, but we need to consider the bigger picture. This could hurt our stock price. People will question our ability to run a business if we seem too caught up in personal drama. Dorian's gaze was unwavering. If we can't stand up for what's right, then we're not worth the investment. This is bigger than stock prices. We need to do the right thing. Gerard hesitated, but eventually nodded. I see your point, Dorian, but we'll need to tread carefully. Dorian stood tall, his resolve hardening. We won't just tread carefully, Gerard. We're going to make sure that Walter's legacy is acknowledged and that the world knows exactly who he is. The next few days were a whirlwind. Bennett Airlines released a public statement acknowledging the mistreatment of Walter Bennett and promising to review their policies regarding customer service, particularly for high-profile individuals and long-time loyal passengers. Dorian, meanwhile, had begun a larger campaign, one that wasn't just about fixing the company's image. It was about bringing his father's name into the light, in a way that had never been done before. Dorian spoke to journalists, appeared on interviews, and even participated in discussions on national TV, reiterating the core values of Bennett Airlines: respect, dignity, and the importance of family. Each interview painted a clearer picture of who Walter Bennett truly was, and it wasn't long before the public began to understand just how much the man had sacrificed for the success of the airline. At the same time, Walter was slowly coming to terms with the growing attention. He had always been a private man, but now, with every passing moment, he was being pulled into the public eye. It wasn't easy, but he knew he couldn't hide forever. His son was right. The world needed to know the truth. As Dorian stood before the media at another press conference, he spoke with a sense of purpose. We're not just a company. We're a family, and the Bennett family stands for something. It's time to show the world exactly what that means. The media ate up every word, the public captivated by the unfolding story. They weren't just hearing about a billionaire businessman and his company anymore. They were learning about a father and son, a legacy of hard work, and the respect that was due to every individual, no matter their age, appearance, or status. And while Walter was still far from being comfortable with the attention, he couldn't help but feel proud. Proud of Dorian, proud of the family he had built, and proud of the legacy he had worked so hard to create. The pressure on Dorian was mounting, but it wasn't just from the media or the public. Bennett Airlines' stock had fluctuated since the incident, and while many people rallied behind the company's decision to stand by Walter Bennett, there were just as many critics who felt the company was being overly emotional, clouded by sentimentality. In the midst of the controversy, Dorian had one goal in mind: to turn this situation into an opportunity, not just for his family, but for the airline itself. He believed that this story, while deeply personal, could be the catalyst for change in the industry. It wasn't just about restoring Walter's reputation. It was about creating a culture that prioritized respect, humility, and dignity, something that could become a legacy far beyond the corporate world. One evening, Dorian was on a call with Claire when an unexpected visitor arrived at the office. Walter Bennett, though not one for public appearances, had come to see his son. Claire had barely finished passing along the message before Walter walked into the room, his presence commanding attention. He was still the quiet, humble man who had once lived a life of little fanfare, but there was a fire in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. "Dad," Dorian said as he stood up from his desk, "what brings you here?" Walter looked around the room, noting the stacks of papers, the schedule in disarray, the stress in his son's eyes. "I've been reading the reports, Dorian, seeing all the noise that's been made. It's all too much." Dorian could feel his father's discomfort. Walter had never wanted this much attention, and the last few weeks had been a whirlwind of events that Walter had never asked for. Yet, here he was, the man who had spent his life in the shadows, now thrust into the public eye. "I didn't want it to be like this," Walter continued, sitting down in the chair opposite his son. "I never wanted to be part of this circus." Dorian looked at him, his gaze softening. "I know, Dad, but we can't undo what's already happened. And maybe this is the universe telling us it's time for people to see who you really are. The world has no idea the sacrifices you've made, how hard you've worked, and what you've built." Walter shook his head, his mind still spinning from everything. "It's not just about me. People are talking about us, about the company. And I fear they're seeing us as something we're not. They see us as just another wealthy family with a business to run. They don't see the heart. They don't see the people who've worked for us, the lives we've changed." Dorian paused, thinking carefully before responding. "Maybe that's exactly the point, Dad. This isn't just about what you built. It's about what you've done for others, the people who worked with you, the ones you've helped along the way. The story that's been told about you has only scratched the surface." Walter leaned back in his chair, contemplating his son's words. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this, Dorian. All this fame, all this attention. It doesn't feel right." Dorian smiled softly, understanding his father's reluctance. "I know, but maybe it's time. You've always done things quietly, and that's great. But now, the world needs to hear your story. And not just for us. For everyone who has ever been dismissed, overlooked, or ignored." There was a long silence in the room. Then Walter spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent my whole life trying to avoid the spotlight. But maybe you're right. Maybe it's time for the world to see what we're really about." The conversation with his father was a turning point for Dorian. It solidified his resolve. This wasn't just about damage control. This was about showing the world the true heart of Bennett Airlines, about bringing the narrative back to where it should have always been, about the people who mattered, not the profits or the luxury. Meanwhile, the fallout from the incident continued. The story was everywhere, from social media platforms to morning talk shows. Critics questioned the airline's policies, demanding answers on how such an egregious mistake could have been made. Some questioned Dorian's leadership. Others still spoke out in defense of Walter, urging the airline to do more than issue apologies. And then, the unthinkable happened. Bennett Airlines had received an official letter from one of their major investors, a powerful group of hedge fund managers who controlled a significant portion of the airline's stock. The letter was filled with warnings, expressing concern that the company's reputation had taken a hit and that action needed to be taken to resolve the controversy quickly. The letter was clear. The hedge fund wanted a change in leadership. Dorian stared at the letter in disbelief. He'd known that the pressure was high, but to hear that one of the company's largest investors was calling for his removal, it was a shock to his system. For a moment, he couldn't think. His mind clouded with thoughts of how things had escalated so quickly. Claire, noticing his distress, walked into the room and took the letter from his hands. "Dorian, we can handle this. We've handled worse." Dorian shook his head. "This is different, Claire. They're not just questioning our policies. They're questioning me. They want to get rid of me." "You're not going to let that happen," Claire said firmly, setting the letter aside. "You've built this company. You've fought for everything you have. This is just a bump in the road." But Dorian was lost in his thoughts. The pressure was too much, and for the first time in a long time, he questioned his place in all of this. He had always wanted to make his father proud, but now he had to face the harsh reality that his leadership was under fire, and his decisions were being scrutinized at every turn. As Dorian sat alone in his office, the weight of the situation pressing down on him, he remembered what his father had said just hours before. Walter had spent his life avoiding the limelight, but in this moment, Dorian realized something. It wasn't about avoiding the spotlight. It was about standing in it, even when it felt uncomfortable. He had to step up and show the world what Bennett Airlines truly stood for. The stakes were higher than ever. The decision was made. Dorian stood before the press, his shoulders squared and his heart pounding. The room was filled with flashing cameras and eager reporters. They were all waiting for the next big story, and Dorian knew he had to deliver more than just words. He had to show them the truth, the one truth that had been lost in all the noise of the past few weeks. Walter Bennett was sitting quietly in the back of the room, his eyes fixed on his son. He had not wanted to be involved in any of this, but his son had insisted. This was no longer just about the family or the airline. It was about something bigger. It was about the principles that had guided their lives, the same principles that had built Bennett Airlines from the ground up. As Dorian stepped up to the podium, he glanced at his father, then turned to face the room of reporters. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dorian began, his voice calm but firm, "what happened with my father in that first-class cabin should never have happened. It was a mistake, an oversight by a single employee. But what's important here is not the mistake. It's what we do with it." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The room was silent. "This company was built on the foundation of respect," Dorian continued. "Respect for our employees, respect for our customers, and most importantly, respect for one another. What you saw that day was a moment of disrespect, a failure of our systems, and a failure of our values. But that's not who we are. We will do better." We will be better. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before continuing. Today, I'm announcing a series of changes. First, I am implementing a new training program for all of our staff, ensuring that every single employee understands the core values that have shaped this company. We will teach them the importance of humility, empathy, and respect, not just in the workplace, but in every interaction they have with our customers. There was a murmur in the crowd, a sense of curiosity as to what Dorian would say next. Second, he went on, we are launching a new initiative called The Heart of Bennett. It's a community outreach program that will invest in underprivileged neighborhoods, offer scholarships, and provide mentorship for those who have been overlooked. My father did not build this airline just for profit. He built it to make a difference. And now, we will take that further. Dorian paused again, his gaze drifting to his father. Walter had always kept his actions quiet, but Dorian knew it was time to bring those actions into the light. The world needed to know that Bennett Airlines was more than just a business. It was a legacy of care, compassion, and integrity. Finally, Dorian added, lastly, I want to address the question on everyone's mind. My father, Walter Bennett. Many of you know him as the quiet, humble man who built this airline from the ground up. But what you may not know is that he did it with the help of countless people. He didn't just create a company. He created opportunities for families, for communities, and for individuals who wanted to better their lives. A quiet hush fell over the room. Reporters scribbled down notes, their attention now fully focused on Dorian and his father. Today, we're going to make sure his legacy is preserved. We will honor his contributions by sharing his story with the world. The story of a man who changed lives without asking for recognition. A man who put others before himself. Dorian's voice cracked slightly, but he regained his composure. This company is more than just about the bottom line. It's about the people who make it what it is. It's about you, the employees who work hard every day, the families who trust us with their travel, and the communities that we serve. It's about every single person who has ever believed in the values we hold dear. The room was filled with applause, a mixture of support and admiration. It wasn't just about the apology or the damage control. Dorian had laid out a vision for a future that honored the past, a future that promised to be more than just business as usual. As the press conference ended, the Bennett family stood together, united in their resolve. The media storm would continue, but now they had a clear path forward. Walter Bennett, once a man content to stay in the shadows, had embraced the spotlight, not for fame or glory, but to ensure that his life's work was never forgotten. And Dorian, standing tall as the leader of Bennett Airlines, had ensured that his father's values would live on in the company, guiding every decision moving forward.